Good evening, and welcome to our forum on protecting excellent teachers. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Esther Bush, and I am proud and honored to be the president of the Urban League of Greater Pittsburgh. The mission of the Urban League is to assist African Americans to achieve economic self-reliance, parity, power, and civil rights. And whether it's securing a good education or trying to find a good job, we need to know that the education of our children is of the highest quality. And of all of the things that a school can do, making sure we have a great teacher in front of our students is of critical importance. I am very pleased to say that I am a former public high school teacher. We're in this together. We're here tonight because in 2012, Pittsburgh Public Schools was forced to let go of 16 excellent teachers. And these teachers had been rated distinguished. They were very good, but they were forced to let them go. These teachers were teaching children at twice the rate of teachers who were at a failing level. We're here tonight because we want to make sure that that does not happen again. This is why we are happy, I am happy to be here, the Urban League co-sponsoring tonight with our partners, with A+ Schools, on protecting excellent teachers. As we know more now about our students than we ever have, we understand that the number of degrees that a teacher has or how many years of service they have put in doesn't necessarily make them the best in the classroom. And so we are here to underscore the fact that we are interested in having the best teachers in front of us. And again, we have come a long way in terms of understanding exactly where our kids are and what helps them to become the best that they can be. I hope tonight's conversation educates you on some of the policy barriers in keeping excellent teachers when there's a budget cut, when we have to address issues locally as well as statewide. We still want to have a way to hold on to our best teachers. And we know the bottom line is everybody feels that way, but we must find a way together to make it happen. Now, without further ado, I would really like to introduce to you an individual that will speak to you first, State Representative Ryan Ottman. He is you can applaud. This man's been working. He is a veteran, a father, and he is the author of the legislation that helped create a new statewide educator evaluation system that provides more feedback and information to educators on how to improve their practice. After those remarks that will help frame what we're going to be discussing this evening, you'll hear from a panel that includes State Representative Seth Grove. We also have with us our own state representative, Jake Wheatley, somebody who crosses all three of the rivers in Pittsburgh to try to make things happen. And he is somebody that I know understands the work of the Urban League movement because he does it every day, fighting for equity and equality. I want to acknowledge Carrie Harris, the executive director of A+ Schools. Please give her a round of applause. She is a tireless advocate, tireless. and absolutely committed and dedicated to equity and excellence in our schools. And finally, a word of thanks to our statewide representatives that we also have that help pull this evening together. The Pennsylvania Campaign for Achievement Now and Students First. Can we give them a round of applause? This evening is extremely important, and I ask you to listen with an open mind. You have cards there for you to write down questions or to take notes, and this is a friendly place for us to ask the hard questions, because the time is now for us to move forward. So with that, Representative Altman.
Good evening. It's a real privilege for me to be back in Pittsburgh with such a distinguished panel to discuss an issue of tremendous importance here this evening, and I think you will enjoy the interaction that we have this evening with the panel. I was given the task this evening of framing the discussion, and I thought we would start by discussing the work that's already been done to advance public policy crafted to support teaching quality and enhance the teaching profession in Pennsylvania. I first came to the General Assembly 4 years ago in January of 2011, and very early in my first term came to the conclusion that a new and far more rigorous teacher evaluation system was needed in the Commonwealth. I came to this conclusion after numerous conversations with my constituents, with educators, with families, school administrators, and education policy experts across the state and nation. I should also add my wife, Kate, who is here with me this evening, who at the time was in her 5th year teaching, was also a strong and influential advocate. She's a strong and influential advocate on a lot of issues. This led me to introduce House Bill 1980, language which would later become part of Act 82 of 2012. Under the old system, at the time I entered the legislature, 99.4% of our public school teachers in the Commonwealth were rated as satisfactory. Yet results from the PSSA that same year indicated that 26% of students were performing at or below the basic level in reading, and 23% performing at or below the basic level in mathematics. An evaluation system that yielded such disconnected results between teacher performance and student achievement was not accurate, nor was it in the best interest of our students or our teachers. First and foremost, in the General Assembly, our concern must always be for our young people and their preparedness for the future that awaits them. I believe that we, as members of the General Assembly, must be their champion. We know there are many factors that influence academic success. To be sure, a student's own motivation and support from family plays a crucial role. However, research is conclusive that high among those factors of success is an effective teacher in the classroom. Rigorous studies consistently show the impact of a high-performing teacher is substantial. Eric Hanushek, when I first gave him credit for his work, I pronounced his name Hanushek, and then a year ago I met him and complimented him, and he promptly told me that that's not how you say his name. Hanushek, a senior fellow at Stanford University's Hoover Institution, writes compellingly of the economic impact of teachers on individual students. A good but not great teacher increases each student's lifetime earnings by $10,600. Consider a class of 20. Under such circumstances, the teacher at the 60th percentile will each year raise students' aggregate earnings by a total of $106,000. A teacher at the 84th percentile will shift earnings up by $400,000. The opposite is also true. A low-performing teacher at the 16th percentile of effectiveness will have a negative impact of $400,000 as compared to an average teacher. Our students have a civil right to a quality teacher in every classroom. We must therefore identify who those teachers are. We must retain them. We must encourage them and ensure our students have access to them. And we must assist those teachers who are struggling. The students facing the greatest hurdles to their education must have access to the highest performing teachers. Fortunately now, with the adoption of Act 82, we have a tool in place to identify who those teachers are. Our concern must also be for the success of our educators. Our educators deserve meaningful feedback for their own professional development. The old system limited meaningful and actionable feedback and perpetuated the status quo. Teachers need and deserve accurate feedback, including the incorporation of student performance data, to improve their practice in order to ensure our students are taught by professionals who continuously grow and improve. Pennsylvania today has a more robust system that distinguishes between educators who are excelling and those who are struggling and need support to improve. Let me share a few facts about the legislation that enabled the new teacher evaluation system. The legislation intentionally did not attempt to micromanage every detail of the evaluation system, nor should it have done so. It did, however, implement a framework for the department to work with those in the field to implement a comprehensive tool. The new system reflects the input and the desire of over 100 local education entities who participated in the Department of Education's pilot program. The legislation replaced the meaningless rating scale of satisfactory and unsatisfactory. The bill expanded the scale to 4: distinguished, proficient, needs improvement, and failing. A simple thumbs up or thumbs down approach does not give educators the level of specificity needed for such a complex profession. 50% of the evaluation is based on traditional teacher practice: planning and preparation, classroom environment, instruction, professional responsibilities. These are based on the Danielson rubric, which has been revised specific to Pennsylvania needs and was utilized throughout the extensive multi-year pilot program. Over 100 school districts statewide were part of this pilot and had the opportunity to give the department feedback about necessary changes and implementation. 50% of the evaluation is based on multiple measures of student achievement. This will include, but is not limited to, performance on assessments, value-added assessment data or growth, other measures, portfolios, and assessments to be determined and approved by the Pennsylvania Department of Education. It was absolutely essential that this portion of the evaluation consists, and I'll say it again, of multiple measures of student performance, not simply a static, standardized test score. School districts were given the flexibility to recommend other elective performance assessments that must ultimately be approved by the Department of Education. My legislation also included and was adopted to include non-teaching professionals, and the evaluation tool was also extended to include principals. The steps Pennsylvania took with the adoption of Act 82 were certainly not without precedent. In fact, we followed what a majority of other states and the District of Columbia were already doing, and in fact seeing positive results for our students and teachers. Now that this new system is being implemented, we finally now have in place an evaluation tool that I believe will serve to improve student outcomes and enhance the teaching profession. I furthermore believe that this new system will be the foundation for other important reforms. We are here tonight to discuss some of these ideas. Earlier this session, I was privileged to work with a number of my colleagues, including two who are here this evening, Representative Grove and Representative Jake Wheatley, who you'll hear from momentarily, to advance House Bill 1722 out of the House Education Committee, legislation that seeks to promote teacher quality by ending seniority-based layoffs in our Pennsylvania schools. This bill was approved by the Pennsylvania House of Education this past spring and is now awaiting action before the full House. We believe, and the House Education Committee agreed, that in the unfortunate situation in which a school district must right-size due to declining student population or budget constraints. Those decisions should not be based on seniority alone. House Bill 1722 was crafted recognizing that we have a new teacher evaluation tool in place, and it ought to be used to help us ensure high-quality teachers are protected. And we're going to discuss House Bill 1722, I'm sure, specifically a little later throughout the conversation. But essentially, House Bill 1722 ensures that as school districts are faced with furlough decisions, that educators are furloughed in the order of fails first, followed by needs improvement, followed by teachers who are rated as proficient, and the last to be furloughed would be those that are distinguished. Within each rating scale, a tie break would remain seniority, and that's how the legislation currently exists, and also as teachers are reinstated would be recalled in the exact opposite order. And I look forward to discussion tonight on the teacher evaluation implementation as well as some of the specifics with House Bill 1722. I appreciate the opportunity to be here and the opportunity to sort of frame the discussion this evening. I look forward to the panel discussion, and I am now going to turn it over to Ashley DeMauro, who will lead our panel discussion this evening.
Thank you so much, Representative Ahmed. Thank you all for being here today to discuss such a timely issue about protecting excellent teachers as we head into this fall legislative session. As Esther mentioned when she opened the discussion tonight, we have a great panel with us here tonight. I will call them up. We have Representative Jake Wheatley from here in Pittsburgh, Representative Seth Grove from York, and Carrie Harris, the Executive Director of A+ Schools here in Pittsburgh. Their bios can certainly be found in your program, but I'm sure many of you in this room know them well. Before we get started with the panel questions, I do want to recognize the elected officials who are in the audience here tonight. We have several members from the House of Representatives here today. We have Representative Hal English, Representative Dan Miller, Representative Rick Saccone, and Erica Frick on behalf of Representative Frankel. We also have Caitlin King here from Senator Toomey's office. And then we also have several members of our school board here, Carolyn Klug, Regina Hawley, Cindy Falls, and Sylvia Wilson. So thank you all for being here tonight. As Esther mentioned, you all will see pens and note cards on your tables. We do want to encourage audience questions here this evening. So I will kick it off by asking our panel a few questions, but please feel free to write yours down as you listen and learn. And members of the group who put this together will be around to collect those, and we'll move to an audience participation portion of the evening in just a little bit. So thank you all for being here, and we will start with a panel for the full question, or for the full panel, a question for the full panel, excuse me. Representative Ahmed discussed efforts to end seniority-based layoffs in his opening remarks. Can you tell us how these types of layoffs impact our schools, our teachers, and our students?
I know for me, my process in this, I tend to be more on the fiscal side of school districts. For me, it came back to simple management. You know, in the private sector, unfortunately, in down economies, businesses unfortunately have to let go of their employees, and they'll look at their employees and say, you know, who's most beneficial to this endeavor moving forward. When we look at the public sector, unfortunately, that's not how anything happens, unfortunately. So moving forward, looking at managing personnel for school districts, particularly in down economies, you know, we have had a recession in Pennsylvania across this country. So school board members are making decisions moving forward about personnel costs. And unfortunately, they don't have the tools to actually manage their personnel force, which is bad for them within their school district, but also for the students. So moving forward, working with School Boards Association, actually me, Ryan, and the prime sponsor, Tim Krieger, all introduced economic furlough bills. We all said we need to do something, so in a rare instance, I guess, we all worked together moving Tim's bill forward, which is a good thing. You know, we're not about the name ID or anything. We're about solving a very, very important issue. And And I know a lot of our school districts have had issues with economic furloughs and trying to maintain the best teachers, because the system we had set up was purely seniority, which doesn't account for your performance whatsoever. It's just you happen to be there the longest, so guess what? You get to stay. I come from a younger generation. A lot of my friends are teachers. My brother and his wife are teachers. I know there's a lot of frustration with younger teachers coming back and saying, I know I am the best teacher in my school, and because of this system we have set up, I'm let go. And what really highlighted it for me was a number of years ago, the Teacher of the Year in New Jersey was furloughed. Now think about that. The best teacher in the entire state of New Jersey was furloughed because she was a younger teacher. So that really hit home with me and ensuring we have the best, no matter what the circumstances in a school are, financial, whatever it is, making sure we have the best and brightest teaching, because it all starts with education. You can't solve any problem we're facing as a nation without a well-educated youth coming up through the ranks.
And let me first thank you for allowing me to be on the panel, and then kind of walk back of how I came to my decision to be supportive of these types of initiatives. One, I represent a district that over the last 10 or 12 years probably has seen the most changes happening inside of it, from school closings to employee personnel issues from building to building, especially its most challenged buildings. And I also represent, out of the Allegheny County delegation, one of the poorest districts per household in the county. Now, in 1865, the Freedmen Bureau, amongst other things that it was set up to do, was set up to try to educate some of these freed individuals. And that was 149 years ago. Almost 50 years ago, we had that wonderful decision around desegregating schools. When I looked around my district over the last 12 years, it seems like nothing has changed from any of that. Now, I came to this conversation not as an issue of should we get seniority or should we lay people off based on seniority or not. It came to we need to create a system that's really going to educate all of our children. And how do we do that? One of the things that just made sense to me is you definitely don't do it when you have economic realities that are facing you, and there's real economic realities that face these school districts. You can't solve the educational quality question by letting the most talented teachers go just because they are less than years. And so it didn't make any sense to me. Now, I certainly don't want to suggest that because you have been there more years than someone else, that means you are less quality. But we had spent a couple years prior to this bill developing evaluation tools that all of the stakeholder groups participated in. And Pittsburgh was the lead in that. Pittsburgh has stepped out before any other part of the Commonwealth and created these tools to really examine how do we make sure we have a way to understand what our teachers are doing in the classrooms, who are impacting students and how they're impacting, and how we can support them, and those that might need additional support, how we can wrap around those supports. So to me, all the preliminary work had already been done, so this just made sense. And so when this bill came forth and there were some people hesitating to support it, I didn't hesitate, because at the end of the day, my job, and I tell people this all the time, my job is to make sure we're doing the best that we can for these children, because they don't have any voices in defense system. Adults can defend themselves, children cannot. So I have to sit in that room and make the difficult choice, and that's what I thought this was. I thought it was not, I really want to say it wasn't even a difficult one, because this bill really just says, and I think Representative did a great job of giving you the real understanding of the bill. It simply says when a district has to make decisions based off of the economic realities, that instead of just using seniority alone, it will use other matrix along with seniority to make that determination. So that you know that you have the most qualified teacher that's making the most impact to those children's education, that you're letting them in, you're keeping them, and then when you rehire them, you're bringing them back based off of their effectiveness. And so that's how I got there, and I think that's why it's important that we continue to see this move forward.
Thank you. I won't reiterate some of the points that have already been made, but like what Representative Wheatley said, for me and for A+ schools, this is very much a core equity issue. Because we know seniority-based systems in lots of ways, but especially related to furloughs, have a disproportionately big impact on our most vulnerable kids, right? So staffing decisions based on some seniority especially impact high-poverty schools. Why? Because those are the schools with high percentages of newer teachers. And so 2 years ago, when Pittsburgh Public had the unfortunately lay off teachers, we had several of our highest poverty schools turn over about half of their staff, right? King, Weil, Westinghouse, Arlington, these are the schools that can least afford that kind of turmoil. We're faced with it. And so when those kids came back to school the next year, they had a building full of new faces, and many of whom were not placed until late, and many who may not have been a good fit. They might be great, they might not be great, but that's not the way we want to make decisions for kids, and it's not the way we want to make decisions for the kids that are going to benefit most greatly from a great teacher. So for us, that's a core issue. Secondly, I think has been mentioned, but I'll just put a little more on it, that the seniority-based furloughs force districts to lay off high-performing teachers. So as Esther said in her opening comments, when PPS had to furlough teachers, they were laying off 16 of the most distinguished teachers in the district. What sense does that make? Why would you, in a time like of economic necessity, have to get rid of your best people, or some of your best people, any of your best people? So luckily, they were able to recall many of them back, but guess what? Several did not come back. And part of my concern, some folks are concerned about charter schools in this room, others aren't, but this was a boon for charter schools, right? If you're concerned about charter schools, this was a boon, because guess who picked up those teachers? Charter schools. Because they could make sure that their schools had great teachers. And I would say the third big issue for us is that these furloughs force districts to recall teachers they know are failing, right? So again, 2 years ago, when PPS had to furlough teachers, they had to lay off 16 distinguished teachers. They recalled some of them back. They laid off failing teachers. They had to recall 11 failing teachers. So they had to knowingly bring in teachers that they knew and they had evidence were not performing and serving children, and bring them back into the classroom. I mean, nobody would do that in any organization. And so, it's sort of policies that don't allow districts flexibility to take these things into account that really end up not serving kids or adults very well.
Thank you. Carrie, this question is for you. As we've heard tonight, Pittsburgh Public Schools has really been on the forefront of the teacher quality fight here in the state. And I know you've worked with them quite a bit on the ground here. So for those in the room who are unfamiliar with the work that Pittsburgh has been doing related to their teacher evaluation system, could you fill us in a little bit about the efforts on the ground and how your organization has helped with that?
Sure. I will try to do so succinctly. This work has been going on since, really got accelerated back in 2008 at a time when the district surveyed its teachers, and 85% of them said, this teacher evaluation system is not working. The system we have is not working, it's not giving us good feedback, and it just wasn't helpful. At that time and since then, the district, the union, administrators, teachers came together and started building something great. They started building a new teacher evaluation system, but actually a lot more than that. They started building career ladder roles for teachers, ways to get our most distinguished teachers in front of more kids and impacting other teachers. They started making lots of changes to the system. They engaged over 400 teachers since 2009 to define great teaching and agreed to how they were going to measure it with their teacher evaluation system. And we've looked at this evaluation system. We have a report in the back, and we believe that this system is reliable, it's accurate, and most importantly, it provides teachers feedback for improvement. What good is a system if it doesn't tell you how to get better, right? So we believe, and like I said, their efforts have gone well beyond evaluation to career ladder roles and other elements. PPS had the benefit of time and money, right? They were able to invest 4 or 5 years in building this system. They had an investment of external money from the federal government and for Gates, but they were able to tinker with the system, pilot the different elements, and ultimately come together with a teacher evaluation system that they could be confident in. And guess what the system did? It has confirmed what many of us had hoped, and maybe some of us hoped we knew, was that there are distinguished teachers in every building in Pittsburgh. We have amazing teachers in this district doing amazing work with kids. We have teachers that are engaging kids in high poverty schools and in low poverty schools. Well, we don't have very many low poverty schools, but we have teachers that are doing remarkable things with kids and accelerating achievement in every school in this district. And this system has allowed us to know that we have failing teachers, not in every school, but we have failing teachers across the district. But I think most importantly is that it's made a lot more knowable about teaching the workforce in Pittsburgh. So we know more now about the differences between our high-performing and low-performing teachers than we ever have. I want to give you a couple examples. We know that a distinguished teacher who scores right at the line in between distinguished and proficient, so let's just say the worst of the best, right? He or she is in the top 26% of teachers in terms of getting student growth. We know that they're skilled in 10 of 11 aspects of teacher practice, and that 90% of their students are reporting that they feel challenged in the class. That's compared to the teachers at the bottom that are right at the top of the failing range, almost proficient, so let's just say maybe the best of the worst. Those teachers fall into the bottom 16% of teachers based on student growth, and only a third of those students, the students in their classes, are reporting feeling challenged, right? We also know more about their practice. These are knowable things now. That's information we didn't have 2 years ago, 5 years ago. These are things and points of feedback we can give to teachers to help them improve their practice. Because much of what we end up talking about is teachers at the high end and teachers at the low end, but the real challenge is moving all those teachers in the middle to improving their practice. So we have a real opportunity now with this evaluation system to make big changes in our schools. We also know, and I'll just say this last thing about the workforce, is this system has allowed us to know that we have distinguished teachers at all levels of seniority. So we have senior teachers that are distinguished, we have mid-career teachers that are distinguished, and we have new teachers that are distinguished. We also have failing teachers at every level of seniority. And that's the kind of information that we've got to enable districts to use in making decisions to manage their workforce so that all kids can achieve.
Thank you, Carrie. Representatives Grove and Wheatley, in the course of your job, you often meet with your local school districts and teachers to discuss state-level policies that they're interested in seeing. Can you tell us some of the state-level policies related to teachers, maybe outside of LAFO or seniority-based layoffs, that your local school districts discuss with you most often?
So I've been approached mostly about things outside of funding, of course. Everyone wants the new funding, on increased funding. Which probably is the greatest thing that I'm getting over the last 4 or 5 years is the funding question. From a policy perspective, though, I think having more flexibility, some flexibility from some of the mandates that we give, because some of those mandates also come with a cost. There is not so much from my district, but from other districts across the Commonwealth. I've gotten a lot of conversation now based off of the study that's going on with the base funding formula system and taken away from the whole harmless question. So for districts like Pittsburgh, that could be major and could impact. Those are the types of things. But outside of funding, the next second thing that I get mostly is about the flexibility, having more flexibility to kind of control and trying to maneuver. So Pittsburgh is a great example. We were just going through this fight with the Department of Education, if their evaluation tools and the ways that they work together to create was going to be approved going forward. Those types of things, I think you'll hear us all the time talk about local control, but then when it gets to those types of things that are impacting our education and has the most value to our economy, we get caught up in bureaucratic mess. So I think that's really how I get approached mostly.
Yeah, I would agree. A lot of my teachers come back and say, let me teach. Let me do my job. I want to make sure these kids graduate, they're successful after graduation. I care about them. Let me do my job. Stop with the mandates. And a lot of it actually comes down to consistency between administrations. Obviously, regardless of party, we're going to have a new governor come in every 4 to 8 years. Just providing some consistency within the classroom. Structure to allow them to go in and do their jobs. Obviously, pension's one of the big things, so they always ask, what's going to happen to my pension? I say, nothing, don't worry about it. We're looking at new hirees, your pension's fine. So those are probably the two biggest things, mandates on school districts and just providing that consistency. And I cannot tell you how many times I've heard it from out of a professional teacher's mouth. Just let me teach, let me do my job.
Great. Recently, we have seen supporters of teacher quality reform file lawsuits in order to try to change state laws. In California, 9 students challenged 5 state statutes related to dismissals, tenure, and seniority-based layoffs, and the courts found that all 5 were unconstitutional under the California state constitution. Now we are going to see appeals and lots more decisions come out of that California case. But similarly, a recently filed New York lawsuit has been filed to discuss tenure policies in that state. How do you believe that these lawsuits affect the debate, and do you think they'll have an impact on the debate here in Pennsylvania?
I think they absolutely do. As soon as the California ruling came down, you could just see the amount of discussion in the education policy arena here in Pennsylvania. And ironically, right around that same time, we started moving House Bill 1722 through committee at the same time. I think it comes of frustration from the lack of elected officials, hearing the calls of the students and the parents saying we need to do a better job within our education system. From younger teachers who are saying, I'm tired of being discriminated against just because I haven't been here as long. Give me a fair shake, at least, to compete and maintain my job, because I love to do it. I went to college for this. I spent thousands of dollars becoming a professional teacher. Let me do my job and educate these kids, because it's what I want to do and what I care about. So I think a lot of it's out of frustration from lack of public policy moving forward, and I think you'll see more of it as we go down. And it is tough. I cannot tell you how hard education policy is. You see the gubernatorial debate; it's all on education. Most of what we debate in General Assembly when budget times, education funding. So it is not an easy policy arena. It takes real aptitude to honestly, I didn't even put on for education committee this year. Leadership kind of came in and said, we'd like you to be on education committee. I'm like, okay, just that self-preparation for being in kind of the heart of the public policy debate. But it's because it's so important, because you really affect people's lives on a day-to-day basis. And the stakes are very, very high. We've lost generations to bad education in this country, and we cannot continue going down those lines. Status quo is just unacceptable in education, especially in the 21st century.
And my response to this is, first of all, I think it is a systemic breakdown when we have to go to court to have the courts decide on education policy when you elect people to do that. Second, I think, for me at least, I don't think the court cases will add to the discussion, in the sense that we already have a very heightened partisan environment around education and its politics. When you have these legal judgments, it emboldens some on one side of the issue, and then it infuriates the other. And so you still don't have that space where you can have a conversation and get to where we all can move together and feel like we are moving a system together. So what ends up happening is people bunker down more into their positions instead of coming to the table and saying, look, everything you're putting on the table isn't the end all to be all and everything we're trying to do, but at the end of the day, we got to get to the middle. I think, and for me, and what I always try to say is, because even in 1722, I supported the economic furlough, but I didn't support the moving to tenure, because for me, that didn't make sense as it relates to academic stuff. Now, this is just for me. And so I want to get to a space where policymakers and educators and those who care about the system, we can be in a room and around a table and we can discuss things without getting caught into our partisanships and our issue areas and try to move stuff for kids. Because at the end of the day, we have lost a whole bunch of generations of kids. But when I say losing of kids, the kids that I lose, they might not make it the next day. You know what I'm saying? So I have an urgency to trying to resolve this, because what's impacting the kids that I represent a lot is the fact that they have these systems, and it's not all the teachers, it's not all the school boards, it's a whole bunch of stuff that happens in this system, but they have a system that's oppressing them. And so I need immediate relief. And so if we're gonna go through courts and it's gonna take us years and years to litigate this, it doesn't resolve my issue. So I'm trying to get to a point where we can have these little fights, but let's have them at the policy table, and let's figure out how we move it together instead of having to go through courts and do it.
I couldn't agree more, and I would just add that I hope that the profile of those cases really just creates some more urgency and helps more legislators have the courage that Representative Grove and Wheatley and Ahmed and others have had in standing behind this bill. It's common sense at some level. It is, polls show it's widely supported by the public. It needs to happen, but it's hard to get done. It's way harder than it should be. And so I commend these representatives for their support, and I hope that it forces others to come to the cause and push this over the finish line.
You just jumped something in my head. I mean, this has been tried before. The previous session, the Senate actually sent over an economic furlough bill. And the big issue with it is it was all subjective at that point. We didn't have the evaluation system we did today. That evaluation system is going to be a tool that affects education policy for the next 100 years because it's data driven. It's not subjective. So when we tried this, and part of the problem with moving the bill forward, there wasn't really an appetite to do this again. Because I remember the conversation with me and one of our leader staff when I got on, one of the things I'd like to see get done is an economic furlough bill. And they're like, ugh, just that sigh, because it was very, 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 very rough when the bill came over. So there was still a little bit, I'd say maybe a bad taste in the mouth of some legislators of leadership having to deal with it again. But we're just within a year, really, it was completely a different circumstance because Ryan led the charge to get the teacher evaluation system in. And now it's data, it's not subjective. We're just not saying at a whim, get rid of teachers based on some subjectivity. It's based on their own performance in a system that's data driven, and I think will be very, very effective, not only for this, but I think many education reforms down the line.
And Representative Wheatley actually just alluded to this, but House Bill 1722 originally contained changes to the way that we would award tenure to teachers. Do you believe that this part of the state law needs to be updated, or should teachers still receive tenure after 3 years of service?
I'd say at some point we do need to look at that and change it. I know the joke with legislators, you're not really a good legislator, so you've been there for 6 years and actually learned something. Joke on the House floor, if you've ever been on the House floor, they have these huge chandeliers. So the joke is we put the new guys and gals below them because they've been hanging there for like 200 years. Because they fall, we squish the new person. So there is kind of like that sentiment of, you gotta work and you gotta learn something. When I hire a new staffer, I usually tell them, you're not gonna learn everything about state government in a day. It takes some time to learn all the bureaucracy, who to call for what issue, is this a policy committee issue? Is this, within a department to call? It takes time to learn. Again, we have a new evaluation system. How does that evaluation system plug into that tenure debate? And I think we had a solid plan moving forward to add tenure in there to advance it. increase it. Some would say, you know, completely get rid of it. I'm not sure we're going to be there vote-wise, but at least have that conversation about, you know, in the 21st century in teaching with economic or with the teacher evaluation system, what is that length of time anymore? And I think we should have open discussions about that moving forward.
All right, so first, I was of the mind state that says if we believe in the people's voice and they've elected school board members, why not take the amount of years for tenure out of state law, because we put the actual years in state law, and just say you have to create a tenure system and allow for the local districts to negotiate that as part of their collective bargaining, however they feel their locals should do it. Okay, but that's off the table. Now, and the thing I kept saying is, someone show me how in our system currently, you have 3 years. And then you have a probationary year if districts so choose to make you go to a 4th year. So in 4 years' time, you can determine if someone is, you know, highly qualified to be in your classroom before you give them tenure. Now, we have so technically it's a 4-year system currently. We were going to move it to 1 more year. And so my question was, how do you get to, how does the 5th year make someone more qualified than, or more excellent than the 4th year? And the one thing I did like in the tenure thing is, okay, it's based off of 2 consecutive, you know, proficiency qualifications. All right, well, you can put that in current law. You could say, you know, in order to get the tenure for the, you know, you have to have the 3rd and 4th year. If you're going to go to the 4th year, has to be proficient. You don't have to change it from 4 or 3 to 5 because you have the opportunities there. I just didn't see the academic or the impacts to the academic thing. That was more, to me, that was more of a punitive measure. Not that the makers of it meant to be punitive. It's more of a punitive measure than it was to actually get the quality. And that was my justification of saying, you know, I think the 3-year and then the 4-year probation, if you want to throw the evaluation tools into that language and change it that way, I think that's the perfect route instead of trying to say 5 years and then, you know, the 1-year difference didn't make sense to me in academics terms. So that's why I felt like it was an unnecessary thing and asked for it to be pulled out of the bill.
I would just say that I fall down similarly. I think tenure, regardless, should be granted based on performance, right? I think everybody would agree that it shouldn't just be about how long you've been on the job, but whether it's 3 or 5 years or 10 years, I'm not sure that matters as much as that it's based on the right things. And so I do think there's a case to be made for some flexibility, right? Like if somebody's not ready in 3 years, you know, that you should have some flexibility to extend it for an extra couple years. So I kind of like the Jake Wheatley, let them negotiate it locally approach.
Thanks. In the national media and even here close to home, attempts to change policies related to teacher quality are often criticized as being anti-teacher. Can you give us your reaction to that assessment and how we might be able to change that message?
I remember someone forwarded me the PSEA response to kind of end of the budget cycle, and one of the statements was, you know, we defeated House Bill 1722, which is a bill that would allow school boards to fire you for anything. Now, Ryan explained what was in the bill. None of that bill said you would be fired for anything. So that's the kind of thing we come across in the political world. There's the political arguments is what's being discussed out there, and then the reality of what the policy actually says. And it's very difficult to get that policy out there. So when I know when I introduced my bill, you know, I did a press release on it. We discussed it. So a couple teachers called me and like, why do you want my school board to fire me? I'm like, that's not what the bill does. So you go through the bill and explain it to them. They're like, okay, but I'm a senior teacher. I want to keep seniority. I said, I get that. It's a protection issue. I said, but if your argument is that because you've been there the longest and you have the most experience, thus you are the best teacher, why are you worried? Why are you worried? You're still going to be there, right? Well, yeah, definitely. I'm like, all right. So you support the bill? No. So some I won over, some I did not. But ultimately, it's that extreme of comments that get out there, unfortunately, in the public policy arena that unfortunately stifle good bills moving forward. You call it muddying the water a little bit, but I mean that's the kind of stuff we're up against when you're trying to do education reform. It's it's a blatant misrepresentation of what the bill actually does. It's not about just firing you at will. It's about setting up a process to ensure the best and brightest teachers are always educating our students to make sure we have the best and brightest students graduating, being productive members of society, and doing great things as leaders, as civil servants, or whatever they want to do when they graduate. That's the point of it.
And I think part of it is when you have an environment that has been set up where you have demonized the entities that are going to be relied on to make the system work. So teachers feel like they've been demonized in this. School boards feel like they've been demonized in this. The funding hasn't come the way that people has expected or wanted over the years. And now we're trying to say we want a system that somehow will evaluate you, and then your job possibly could be dependent upon these evaluations that some believe may not actually evaluate what we're trying to evaluate. So I say all that to say I don't fault those individuals for trying to protect their interests and the things that they think makes this system valuable. Because again, I always tell people, I can't have a quality education system if I don't have quality teachers, and I can't have angry teachers who feel like they can't really teach or their job is on the line performing in those classrooms. So I need them to feel safe and secure in their job. I need them to think that they're valued. But at the same time, we have to all realize the system has a breakdown, and it's not to point fingers. Again, I keep saying if the environment was different, we might could have a conversation where we can get people in a room and agree to something. The fact of the matter is, we're in a hostile environment. Now, I was a former active duty Marine. Well, we can have all types of training we want before we get on the battlefield, but once we get to the battlefield, I'm going to that thing that I know is my safety net, and I know this is safe for me. You know what I mean? I don't want to hear all this stuff where you get me going out here and there might be a landmine over here because I don't have a chance to think it through and all. So that's what we are. We on the battlefield in a sense around people's jobs, the futures of these kids, the future of public education as we know it. So there's a lot of animosity. There's a lot of hype emotions. I just wish that we could get somewhere where we could say, look, there's going to be change, and you have to get comfortable with change. But how do we get to that change where you feel like you're a shared participant in it and you don't feel like I'm forcing it on you? And we can't come in the room and we say all this stuff. We got to come in the room and say everything's on the table. I'm willing to put everything on the table, but I'm not going to be the only one sacrificing, right? So if I give up this, you got to give up something too. And I think we just haven't gotten there yet.
I will add one aspect of it. We did do hearings on it, and we took the testimony into consideration. So when the unions came up and testified on it, one of the big things that they were very fearful of is school boards, since we're talking about economic furloughs, saying we're going to get rid of the highest paid, which is the most senior. So the whole scope of this is to get rid of the highest paid senior and keep the lowest paid, the new teachers coming in. So we actually put language in there to ensure that salary wasn't taken into consideration. Literally, it is, your performance on the evaluations. Obviously, we have the tiebreaker for people who score the same and stuff, but we precluded the ability to actually count salary as part of it. You can't have the economic impact of that whatsoever. So we listened and we tried to protect. And I get the old arguments of, we're worried about economic furlough without some form of criteria because we're worried that, the superintendent's gonna protect their favorite teacher, or let's say a school board, a member has a spouse or sibling in the school, they're gonna protect that person over everybody else. And again, those arguments went out the window with the evaluation system that we utilize. I mean, you have the empirical data now to go back and actually score teachers.
And employment law is a lot different today than it was 30 years ago when these kind of protections were more necessary. But I would say this, I think that these teacher quality policies are very much, from my point of view, social justice issues. And as such, they are not anti-teacher. They couldn't be more pro-teacher, right? I think there is like a recognition and a new body of evidence in this country that is confirming what mothers have always known, that teachers matter, right? And this is perhaps the most consequential job in our country. I always say it's the most important job. And if it matters, then we need to think about protecting the quality of it, right? And we need to make sure that we're protecting the people that do it well. We're protecting them, and we're putting the interests of our kids first. If this was an inconsequential job, we wouldn't have to worry about this, right? But this is critically important. And I think teacher evaluation, teacher quality policies are just about recognizing this and raising the level of respect and honor that we're giving to this profession by taking it seriously. These aren't babysitters. Babysitters are important. This is not a small, just a notion. This is incredibly important work. It's getting more difficult by the day. What we need our schools to do today is much more difficult than what we needed from them a decade or 2 decades ago. And so the expertise, the care, the compassion required today is much more important, and it's too important to leave up to chance. And that's really what teaching quality reforms are about.
And as we get towards the last few questions up here, if you have any questions, make sure you're writing them down, and if you just wave them, we'll have somebody come around and collect them as we go through these last couple. Representatives Grove and Wheatley, what barriers do you face legislatively when it comes to passing significant teacher quality legislation? And what can supporters, like some of the members in the audience here tonight, do to help change that dynamic?
The barrier we faced, at least I faced the most, is just the fact that people in the General Assembly typically don't want to be, we're not the most daring souls. And so status quo is where we tend to like to sit. And whenever there's critical things that are complex and have people on both sides of the issue that we care about, we tend not want to do something. And so it's the issue of trying to get a big system, the insiders, to move on something. And it's just the process takes a long time. And I'm not against the process taking a long time. I think that's why the framers developed the system that they had. It's supposed to be slow and deliberate. But, you know, eventually you're supposed to get to something, you know what I mean? It's supposed to move towards something. And of course you have stakeholders groups that we all care about. You know, I talk about this all the time. You know, I came in and got elected in 2002, and one of the mentors that I had at the time, he told me, you have to make a decision. If you want to get something done, then you have to be comfortable with having people who were your friends become your enemy, and people who were your enemies become your friend, but it's going to be situational because you're going to make difficult decisions. But if you want to be here for a long time, and you're just sitting back and just toe the line, and you'll be here forever. And so for me, my time is too valuable to be sitting on the line and towing things, and plus my personality just don't do that. And so it's just natural to me, but it's not natural for other people to go against people who are their friends.
It's especially the closer you get to election, the intestinal fortitude of the General Assembly kind of shrivels up. So it is tough. You know, we're September, elections coming around November, for people to make tough votes on tough issues. Now, ideally, I would argue that's your job, to make tough votes on tough issues. Otherwise, why would you want to be a policymaker and your job is to vote on stuff? So moving forward, as we head into the fall session, you know, we have 12 calendar days. We have a bill positioned on second consideration. It's got 28 amendments on it. Roadblocks, a lot of times, you know, members look for reasons not to vote for stuff. So I didn't hear anything on this issue, so it's not a big deal, so we shouldn't do it. So grassroots, people out there in the public calling and saying, this is an important issue. You need to get out, and we need to get this across the goal line before session ends. They may say, well, I just don't know enough about it, so we shouldn't do it. So that's us going to our colleagues and saying, here's the educational aspect. This is why it's important. Stakeholder groups going into Harrisburg and saying this is why this is important. Meeting with members in your district. It does take a team effort. I can't say I've ever done a bill by myself. It takes a lot of people. It takes going across the aisle to people who you may have nothing ever in common, and generally you're on opposite sides arguing, but you might find that one thing you actually have in common and work together on it, and that's a great feeling. And then you develop a bond, and then you find out, hey, you know what? I have more in common than what you think. I'm a big Steelers fan. Jake, you're a Steelers fan, right?
I am.
All right. Unique things that you have in common that you build a rapport with, and then you can go to that person, you can have a discussion. It may just start off as, discussing how the Steelers are going to trounce the Ravens. It may start with that, but then it develops into other areas, and then you're able to significantly have an open and honest conversation away from the political talking points of where you're at, and then you can start really getting down and accomplishing. But it takes people, it takes organizations that are hosting this, it takes individuals in this room to call, to advocate, to keep the pressure on, and to let legislators know, it's just not us saying we need to do this. There are people out there that support this and understand how important it is to making sure we have a quality education for our kids. So there's a lot of stuff that can happen. And the opposition, people who oppose legislation, they do the same thing. They'll have their members call and say, this is a bad bill, you shouldn't vote for it. So legislators will sit there and say, I got 30 calls one way and 10 calls the other. So those things do matter, those contacts and stuff. So there's a lot that play into how a legislator views it. Some legislators may say, I don't care who's calling me. I believe this is the right thing to do, and this is the way I'm going to go it, whichever way. Others may, do that initial poll in their district to see what they're getting calls about, to see where it's at. Some may rely on, I'm not an expert in every policy field in Harrisburg, so I may rely on somebody in my district. They may call them and say, who that is, and locally building those rapport with that legislator to be that person is very helpful. To say, I can call, Jake up, and I know he's very involved in education issues, and get his take on it. So it's important to build those relationships, whether it's between legislators, constituencies, stakeholder groups, and that's what really allows you to move the ball forward and get good policy moving forward. So your help is very, very important moving this forward.
And Ashley, I was going to say, Representative Grove is right on point when he says that, but the organizations like PenCan and A+ and others who have information, at least for me, it's helpful to get folk who give you information of the impact of whatever it is we're talking about. Because people assume that since we are representatives, we are knowledgeable about subjects. Don't assume that. And so the first thing that you could do is help to educate your member about what it means if something happens. Because many times we just get things and we go off of what it sounds like, feels like, and looks like, instead of knowing that this is going to have real impact. And so having, again, going to Representative Grove, having a relationship where you're sharing information, when you, and they feel comfortable approaching you and say, look, this is an issue that's coming down the pike, give us your take on it. I think that's very important as well. And that's something that we miss a lot, that give and take feedback from our districts and those organizations that are in the mix of these conversations.
We've spent a lot of time here tonight talking about evaluations and about LIFO, seniority-based layoffs, and tenure reform. But are there other policies that you believe we should be working on in Pennsylvania that will improve teacher quality outside of those policies?
Well, I'm going to say, expand the question from just teacher to policy. I think systematically we need to be working on things that expand this system, really create a real system. One, from the training institutions. The fact of the matter is, if we're going to have evaluation tools of teachers who are in our system, I, for one, think you should also be evaluating these schools that educate these teachers and send them. And we should have a mechanism, but we have a state law that prevents us from capturing that information. Even though the districts can themselves communicate back to the schools of education that they're getting these teachers from, we can't necessarily capture it in a systemic way. I think we should have that as a conversation. We should also create a system, in my opinion, that moves us from where we were hundreds of years ago to the 21st century. So we actually could have a 21st century educational environment that specializes the process solely for the individual student and can help that individual student progress along the ways like we do with IEPs. We wanted a conversation around creating student learning plans, and other places they've done these things. I think we should really be involved in really looking at our system as it relates to education and figure out how can we reform it. And when we talk about teacher effectiveness and evaluation, those aren't silver bullets. They're not going to change the whole dynamics of this system by itself. They're pieces of it. But you know, that's my take on it. We really should be having conversations around how do we create a 21st century educational environment that's a systemic environment that base the principles of which taking a student from where they are and creating their lesson plan that's specialized for them and getting them to where we need them to be as our state standard.
You know, we have a education system predicated on what I would say mascots. We have territories that were created a long time ago that probably if you checked which way the streams have moved throughout the years, probably don't even exist anymore. But we have education system around highlighting athletes and athletics rather than quality of education. You know, on the House floor in June, you'll see members bring up their sports teams. I've done it before. We have championship sports teams, you know, state titles, swimmers. One thing we don't see a lot is the celebration of academics within the education system. I will highlight this by, there's a York County School District. It's a Cross County School District, part in Cumberland, part in York County. It's 2 school districts, 1 administration. And 2008, 2009, they put up the proposal, you know, and 2 separate sports programs. They wanted to merge the 2 sports programs in lieu of cutting education. Now think about that. You think it's a pretty easy solution, you know. School districts are there for the education of the students. What do you think they ended up doing? Parents came in, crowded the room, and academics went away. They maintained the sports programs. It was the priority of the school districts was the athletics. Now, I was an athlete. It was great. You know, you learn to work as a team. There's a lot of benefits in there. But it's not critically the most important aspect of the educational system. I think we've gotten away from the basics in education, the focus on that. You know, we're not going to go back in time. We're not going to eliminate sports programs. I mean, if we were in Texas, if you ever just came from Texas, you know, they still shut down Fridays for football games. Probably would not be alive. You'd probably be throwing me out the window, but it is a reality. Now, athletics are also important. I had friends that basically have said, you know, if I didn't play football, I wouldn't have graduated because it forced me to focus on my academics. And maybe the key is raising the bar for athletes to be athletes and say instead of a C, you know what, you have to maintain a B, or maybe you have to maintain an A to force you to focus on those academics. And hold feet to the fire, you know, making sure that, you know, the star athletes aren't given a bye, because at some point, athletics are over, whether by your desire or by an injury, and what are you left with? I've heard plenty of stories. I watch ESPN of some of the greats in financial ruin because they focused on the athletic side. You know, they didn't get their degree in college, and now they're in dire straits because they didn't focus on the educational opportunity. And there's some greats, you know. I was a Lakers fan, loved Magic Johnson. James Worthy got his law degree while playing the NBA, and he's got a great, you know, law firm right now. And those are the celebrated stories you need to hold out there. The athletes that don't jump into the NFL draft. You know, they go through their 4 years and they say, you know, I came here for academics, and I'm going to stay my 4 years for those academics. And there's a lot of them. You know, you kind of focus on basketball, football. You know, there's plenty of athletes, swimmers, and stuff that get a great education and actually graduate their diversity. So I think breaking down those barriers and refocusing on their actual job of education, I think is critical moving forward.
So I would just add a couple things. I think I don't disagree with anything that's been said so far. I would just add a couple specifics. One is, I think preserving the Pennsylvania core is actually pretty critical. This is the state standards that were adopted in the last few years and are being implemented and rolled out in districts across the Commonwealth. Districts have spent hefty sums of money aligning their curriculum, textbooks, preparing their teachers to teach to higher, more rigorous standards. And these are important if we want our kids to be able to be prepared for workforce, for jobs, for career training, and for college. Far too many of our kids are entering college and doing their first year of college work in remedial classes. We need to ratchet it up, and that's really what the Pennsylvania core was about, but it is under attack. And so preserving the good things that we're doing is going to become critically more important. I think protecting the legislative intent of Act 82, and this really gets into allowing that local control that Representative Wheatley mentioned, so that districts can tailor evaluation systems that work is going to be critically important. And I think one thing we can probably all agree on is that we need a rational, equitable, predictable education funding formula in Pennsylvania so that we can fully fund our public schools and take this scarcity mentality out of the public debate around school reform. You know, I think what Representative Wheatley has said is so important, that we're like, you know, we're not even able to have the kind of conversations about change that we need to be having because we're fighting over resources. We need to fund our public schools and reform them at the same time. And I think those are the kind of things that we're going to be focused on here at A+.
Wonderful. With the time that we have left, we have a few audience questions here, and so I will give one to each of you. First, Carrie, we'll go with you. Can you say more about the evaluation system for principals and why it's important to ensure that we have just leadership in our schools?
Absolutely. So that's a great question, and Pittsburgh just has a new principal evaluation system in place, right? So we know that principals are an enormous lever, right? They're in terms of creating school cultures that teachers want to teach in and where students can learn. And a high-quality principal can make a teacher want to teach in a building, and can make a teacher want to leave. A low-quality principal can make a teacher want to leave. And so it is important that we have a high standard for our school leadership. That's essential that we have a high standard for our school leadership if we're going to hold anybody to high standards, kids and teachers. So that evaluation system is rolling out this year, and I think it's going to be important. I think we have a lot of work to do in that area. I think Pittsburgh made some strides, 4 or 5 years ago, and has seen some more recent challenges, but definitely have some work to do to improve principal quality as well.
Great. And Carrie, maybe you can also speak to this since you have some of the information about Pittsburgh's experience. How many of the distinguished teachers that we saw in Pittsburgh were in the neediest schools? Did we see them equally spread out among those schools?
Yes, I don't know that they're equally spread out, but there are excellent teachers, and we know that those distinguished teachers are in every school. I don't know it off the top of my head, but we do have like a proportionality analysis that was shared with us, not exactly individual teachers. That I could get that to you if you were interested, but I don't remember it off the top of my head if it's evenly distributed.
Great. Representative Wheatley, are there any compromises that would help us pass 1722?
Now, I'm not getting into partisanship, but quite frankly, I was surprised that it didn't pass the House. But I think it speaks more to the fact of how strong our teachers' unions are. And until they're ready to come to the table, in my opinion, now I'm not in the majority, but I don't think it would change even if you had a Democratic majority until the teachers' union is prepared and willing to come to the table and have a conversation about it. I think it's going to be a fight, uphill fight.
Representative Grove, so what specifically can we, meaning the audience here and the constituents here, do and by when? If you can speak a little to our timing.
Yeah, I would go home tonight and go to your state representative, find them on the website, and send them an email. If they're working, I'm impressed. I'm a pretty hard worker, but I would not be probably in the office necessarily this late at night. Most of us have these awesome tools. They're Blackberries or whatever. Believe it or not, I still have a Blackberry. I prefer the RAM. I don't know why. I just do. But most of us have our email. So send them an email, him or her, and say, listen, House Bill 1722 is very important. We need to ensure we have quality teachers at all our schools at all times. Please, please, please vote yes on that bill. Follow up with a phone call tomorrow and say, hey, sent you an email last night. I was at this wonderful forum, wonderful discussion. Did you get my email? You did, so the representative knows I fully support House Bill 1722. And then we go into session the 15th, 16th, 17th, and maybe in a week or two follow up with another phone call. Hey, did you pass that yet? And hopefully you'll get good news. But staying animate, talk to your friends, talk to your neighbors, talk to your colleagues, talk to everybody you can. Stay up to date. A lot of the organized Students First, A+ schools, Penn Can, they'll send you updates. If you get the email update, forward them to your friends so they're up to date with it. It's really the power of the people. We're elected by the people. We listen to the people. We didn't like people, we would not be in this job. Just getting out there and supporting it as soon as possible, and then stay animate, stay supportive, and set up a meeting. You can set up a meeting, go in and talk to your legislator. It's election time. They may hitting on doors. So if they bang on your door, say, I'm X, Y, and Z running for the state house. Just say, House Bill 1722. Where you at on it? Find out where they're at. If they don't know, discuss it with them. Tell them how important it is, why it's important. So there's many ways to do it. Just go out there and do it. Facebook, Twitter. Find their Twitter handle and say, hey, just at this awesome event, House Bill 22, get it done. Facebook, post comments. There's multitude ways of getting a hold of your legislator. Send them a letter. You like the old-fashioned letter. I love getting actual letters, handwritten letters, believe it or not. They're actually my favorite. So just get out there. It's that personal contact and keep up with it, because it's just not this issue. There'll be other important issues. So starting that dialogue now, getting that familiarity, getting to know your state representative, your state senator, and you can talk to your senators later. We need to get the House action first. So focus on your state representative. So that's your homework for tonight. Congratulations. You show up, you get homework. Go start talking to your legislator as soon as possible. Talk to your friends, talk to your family members. You got family members that live out on the eastern end or northeast or wherever in Pennsylvania. Call them too and go discuss it and have them go talk to their legislator as well. The more legislators hear, the more they want to act on stuff and move it forward. And you got to get that positives out, because there's going to be a lot of negatives as this bill moves forward. And if you happen to, maybe in a legislator's district who's in leadership, extra bonus for talking to them as well.
Thank you. Thank you all so much for your input on this panel tonight. I would suggest that if any of you in the audience have any questions, that you approach any of these panelists afterwards to speak with them one-on-one. And I am just going to call Carrie up here to close out the program. And I just want to thank you all for being such a great audience.
All right. Well, thank you all for being here tonight, for spending a couple hours talking about protecting excellent teachers. I want to just do a few housekeeping things. I wanted to recognize that Chelsea Wagner, Allegheny County Controller, and Michael Lamb, City Controller, were here earlier. I think we might have missed them, but I want to make sure we recognize them. I want to thank Representative Grove, Representative Ahmet, and Representative Wheatley, and all the elected officials that are here tonight. Thank you for your commitment to our kids. And sticking with it and pushing this ball up the hill, this boulder up the hill. Thank you for your leadership. I want to thank the Urban League, Students First, and PennCan for your partnership in putting this event on and fighting for our kids on this issue for the past 18 months. I think we've been at this. So. I want to encourage you all to do your homework that you were just assigned, right? Call your state rep and communicate your support for HB 1722. You can send an email, and A+ can help you. A+, PennCan, Students First, the Urban League, we can all help you with contact information to do those homework assignments. And what did you say extra credit was?
Leadership.
Leadership.
Yeah.
Calling the House leadership,
Yep.
which is Representative Mike Turzai,
Yep.
Western Pennsylvania guy. Somebody in the room might know him. So give him a call and tell him support HB 1722. So thank you all for being here. Nothing could be more important than doing what's right for our kids. Could I get an amen to that?
Amen.
Right? Otherwise, you wouldn't be out at 8 o'clock on a Wednesday night in September. So thank you for what you do for kids, each of you in your own way. I want to remind you, we put a little calendar of events on your chair tonight, so please take a look at it. We have some exciting things coming up this fall with A+ schools and our partners, one of which is an open house next week at our office where we'll be serving more cocktails and snacks. And another one may be of interest when Representative Wheatley talked about really casting a vision for what it's going to take to make all of our schools work. We're holding an event on just that topic, Schools That Work, and we're bringing in a principal from New York City to share what he did at his school to get high achievement and excellence for African American students. And we're going to have some local principals as well. So that event is coming up on October 22nd. The information is in on your calendar, and we'll be emailing all of you about it in the coming weeks. So thank you again for being here and for everything you do for our kids. Go and be safe and well going forward. Thank you.